We jump into week 5 of our Politics of Jesus series, Beyond Culture Wars. I want us to stop for a moment, collect ourselves, and to ask God in this quiet space to meet us exactly where we individually need to be met. Because while we're in many ways the same, while there are a lot of things that we have in common, we are all uniquely individual. And there's a variety of different things that are going on in each of our lives that we need God to touch, to speak to meet us in. So I'm going to give us 30 seconds, and as we're quiet, I'm going to just ask you to pray that prayer. God, meet me where I most need to be met as we open the Scriptures. And then at the end of that 30 seconds, we're going to pray the Lord's Prayer together. And if you know it, you can join me. And if you don't, you can just listen. Okay? So 30 seconds, you talk to God. Different though we may be, Lord, we are unified in this place. One body, one Spirit, one baptism. And we pray together the prayer your Son taught us when we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever. Notice when you're young, let's say grade school, and I don't know whether you even play this anymore. Do they do kickball or dodgeball anymore? Is that something? You ever notice that, even remembering back to your own experience, that when sides would be chosen up, they'd pick a captain for both teams, and then one by one, you would line up and they would pick one here and one here and one here and one there. More often than not, the teams were lopsided, weren't they? It was hardly ever a fair fight in these things. Because one captain would inevitably be more strategic and the other would just pick their friends, right? You know, like you go for two groups. There was always sort of the us group who tended to kind of win most of the time. And then there was the them group who you would never draft early in your picks. So there was us and them. And the same teams would win most of the time. As you get older and you move into middle school and high school and away from the dodgeball and the kickball fields, you develop these cliques, right? Certain groups gather around a variety of different things. It could be sports, it could be theater, it could be how you look, it could be whatever. I don't even know the groups today. If I started speaking to groups, it would show you how old I am. But as you got older, there would be these groups that would sort of divide off into us and them. You would gather with people who looked, act, thought like you, and then those people who didn't, you sort of separated yourself from. I'm so glad, though, as we become adults, that we don't do that anymore. Aren't you? I'm so glad that we leave this behind with our youth. Now, actually, it gets worse as we get older, unfortunately, I think. Even much more so in this political season is it heightened, us and them. Red and blue, Republican, Democrat, Trump, Clinton, right? And there are these issues that will be highlighted, and then one side will speak to it, and the other side will speak to it, and battle lines are drawn. It is amazing with what vitriol we speak to each other about issues that ideally we would agree as a people. We want to find the best ideas and move forward together. But we don't do that. We draw battle lines and we lace up our boots and we go to war over issues. And we demonize those who do not agree with us. And at every turn, we make it personal and try and tear them down. I'm so glad that it's only the political candidates that do that too, aren't you? Yeah, somehow there is a spirit in our culture that likes to divide and conquer, isn't it? We've known that since we were very young. As we get older, it becomes more and more powerful, right? There is this divide, and when we come to issues that you can moralize, let's say hot-button issues historically, like abortion or gay marriage, or something that would have more of a moral tone to it, the rhetoric only gets ratcheted up, and the sides only become more polarized. And we fight what we call these culture wars. We think that if we can just elect the right candidate, right, or pass SR Bill 242 and legislate change, that somehow transformation is going to happen in a human heart and in the life of culture. It's really not true, and that's why Jesus never really was an us-them kind of guy. To Jesus, everybody was us. There was no boundary that he would not cross. There was no line that was so strong that divided him from stepping across and reaching into the life of one who would otherwise be marginalized by the us group. And I think it's important these days, especially now in a season where this spirit is so heightened, that we hear a third voice. Because when we get caught up in this stuff, no matter what it is that we believe, right, no matter what our ideologies are, if we get caught up in a spirit where I demonize you, or I push you to the edges, or you are in a them group and I have certain feelings about you, I move away from what is the essence of my faith, which is centered in love for you. It's very difficult to love you if I'm hating on you. And what I want us to do is I want us to listen to a third voice. I want us to look at a third way. Because Jesus, in that passage that I read to you early, those of you who were here in our prelude time, Mark chapter 5, Jesus is not just going to speak with authority about issues that are important. He's going to embody authority. And the way in which he lives his life and embodies these truths are going to literally change a person and a town's life. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in hearts changing to the point where those witnesses become light in what is dark rhetoric. I'm interested in eliminating this line. No matter how much you and I may agree to disagree on topics, that you and I can still disagree without being disagreeable. We can still see things differently and have love and respect in our heart for one another. That's the third voice. That's the third way that I want us to look at. So, if you have a Bible, turn with me to Mark chapter 5. So, let's take this down just so that maybe it doesn't block you. That works? We'll take it all the way down. That works. Better? So what you need to know before we read this text again is that Jesus spent much of his time on this side of the lake. Capernaum was basically his home base. So most of his ministry was in and around here and down on this side, okay? Rarely did he go to the other side. But in this particular story, he's going to sail, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 miles to here and move into a space that no good self-respecting Jew would ever go. It was an area called largely the Decapolis, the 10 cities. It was a center of Roman power. It housed a legion of 6,000 to 8,000 Roman soldiers. These forces were marshaled against and brutalized those who were on the other side, the Israelites. They were under their thumb. It was a place of Roman power, but to the average Israelite, it was an evil place. It was a wicked place, and they never, ever went. But Jesus wasn't an us-them kind of God. And so, he is going to take them on a little field trip. And he's going to introduce them to an individual who is going to scare the bejesus out of them. But he does so for a purpose. Now, when he crosses to the other side, it looks like this. That looks pleasant, doesn't it? That doesn't look like evil, wicked, does it? It looks like nice, relaxing. Well, that is the shoreline that he would have come into, they believe. Now, when he gets there, he probably would have sailed into a town called Hippus. But that's not where the story is going to take place. The story is going to take place back into those hills, in a place called the Gerasenes. And so when he gets there, he's going to be welcomed by a committee of one. And this guy is out of his mind. He's a crazy wild man. Listen to the beginning of the story. So they arrived at the other side of the lake, in the region of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from a cemetery to meet him. This man lived among the burial caves, and he could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrist, and he smashed the shackles. And no one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night, he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. This guy's a mess, right? I don't know if you can get a picture of what this guy might be like, but when I think of him, I think of this guy. It just gives me an image, it gives me a picture of what this guy who was possessed by many spirits must have looked like and been like. Now, he was a desperate man. What did it say of him in this story, in the opening parts? What did it say of him? He was a dangerous and violent man, and the people of the town were so threatened by him that they would lock him in chains, but even the chains could not keep him. This is great power. This is a terrorist. He is more than a nuisance. This is the kind of guy, when he is loose, you are locking your doors tightly and bolting them and setting up armed guards outside of your house so that this guy won't come your way. Now, for the most part, he stayed in a place of death, right? Where did he live? He lived among the what? The dead, the tombs. Now, when you and I think of a cemetery of tombstones, we get a certain image in mind, right? We all know what a cemetery looks like, but that's not really the picture of what it looked like. He wasn't like going in a cemetery and laying his head on like a gravestone or something like that. The cliffs in the side of those hills when they arrived, that picture that I showed you here, into the side of the hills there were some limestone caves, and outside the city they would go and bury their dead. So literally they would take them, they wouldn't put them underground, they would take them and entomb them. So get the picture. This guy, who is shackled but can't be restrained, lives in these tombs where they put dead people. Can you imagine what a night in a tomb with some dead people is like, but this is his reality. Jesus crosses into an unclean territory and meets an unclean man who lives among the dead. He is violating every possible holiness code and rule. And he's taking his friends because he is not an us-them kind of guy. He is crossing to the other side because there's a man who desperately needs his attention. And he will not buy into the rhetoric that those who are on the other side say, oh, don't go there. That's a dirty, evil, terrible place to go. So he goes, and from night to night, he finds a place in a tomb among the dead. He is no longer welcome in the company of the living. He is so despised and such a threat that the only place he can find any rest is with the dead. Why? Because basically, he's a dead man walking. His life is and has been wrecked for some time. And he can find no rest. And there is great power, such power in this guy, that the chains that they try to bind him with cannot even hold him. Let's continue the story. Now when Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him. And he ran to meet him, and he bowed low before him. With a shriek he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out of the man, you evil spirit." And then Jesus demanded, "What's your name?" Does this seem weird to me? Is it just me, or is this a really weird exchange? Here's a guy who's been doing nothing more than torturing and terrorizing everybody he possibly can, so much so that he's pushed out to the abode of the dead. Jesus shows up, and the first thing he says to Jesus is, "Don't torture me." That's what his whole life has been about, apparently. But now, and when he sees Jesus, he also recognizes who he is. How is it possible that those who are in their right mind didn't realize him and understand his authority and power, and yet the evil spirits that resided in this man knew exactly who Jesus was? So someone who was so powerful that he would break chains is now bowed in the presence of Jesus. And he's begging, "Don't torture me." He's already tortured. He's as good as dead. The living way is standing right in front of him. So is it the guy? Is it the evil spirits that are possessing him? I would think that it's the latter. Are speaking and begging Jesus to leave him alone. And Jesus asked an interesting question. What's the question that Jesus asked him? What is your name? What is your name? This is a very interesting question. It's a question of identity. Where is it that you find your identity? Listen to what he says. He replied, "My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man." My name is Legion, because there are many of us. He no longer has a name. He no longer has a life. The only thing that defines him is that which assails him. And this is a place of application for you and I. The very things that we have done over the course of our lives those things that have battered and bruised us, those places of great failure and deep regret, sometimes they become so strong in our lives that they become our identity. And we live from that place of woundedness and death, and we can no longer even see ourselves as we were. All that we can see ourselves is as the sum total of those failures and disgraces and screw-ups and issues. And Jesus would say, what's your name? And I wonder if he asked you that question, how it is that you would respond. What would you say to him in that space? What would he say to you? He is so possessed by that which assails him that the only response is, my name is Legion, for we are many. Now a legion, remember, at the very beginning, is an order of soldiers, the largest order of soldiers in that day. Between 6,000 and 8,000 Roman soldiers would make up a legion. 6,000 to 8,000. So I don't know literally if that's how many evil spirits possessed the guy, but let's just say there were a lot. And they were guiding his life. And they were leading him away from the community. Right? He was living among the dead, away from life, away from hope. This guy had no hope. He was begging Jesus to leave him alone so that he could continue his life among the dead. Jesus encounters him. And so far as we know, this is the very reason that he came. He got in his boat and he crossed the boundaries and he went into a place that no good self-respecting Jew would go, perhaps just for this guy who really needed him, even if he didn't know he needed him. You know, sometimes we need help and we don't even really know that we need it or how much help we actually need. And in our own pride, we resist the thought of us needing help from somebody else. He begs him, just don't torture me, as if Jesus tortures people, right? That's what he's known for torturing people. This is the enemy opposing light. It's darkness saying to the light, don't come and illumine my darkness. Let me stay in the dark. Jesus is not an us-them kind of guy. The story continues. Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them to some distant place. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. Send us into those pigs, the spirits begged. Let us enter into them. So Jesus gave them permission. The evil spirits came out of the man, and they entered the pigs. And the entire herd of about 2,000 pigs plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. The herdsmen fled to the nearby town and the surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. And people rushed out to see what had happened. A crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons. And he was sitting there fully clothed and perfectly sane. And they were all afraid. Then those who had seen what had happened told the others about the demon-possessed man and the pigs, and the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and to leave them alone. That isn't the way it happened on the other side when Jesus would perform an exorcism or do a miracle or have a healing, is it? On the other side of the lake, what would they do? They would go get other family members who were sick or infirm or possessed, and they would bring them, because if he could do that for them, then he could do that for Uncle Charlie. Right? So they bring along Uncle Charlie because he needed help. But on this side of the lake, when they saw the man who had been living among the dead, crazy naked guy who didn't even have a name, clothed and seated at the feet of Jesus and in his right mind, they became what? Afraid. Doesn't that seem like an odd response to you? If crazy naked guy who was a terrorist to my entire community and who had been pushed out into the abode of the dead all of a sudden, one day I came across him, I'm like, gosh, you look familiar. I can't place you, though. He's like, yeah, I used to be a crazy naked guy who ran and lived among the dead. He said, but something happened to me. And he said, I don't really know exactly what. That's why I'm sitting at the feet of the one who did this, because I want to learn. I want to follow in this way. This is a different life than I've ever known, and I have to have this. And so when those who had been tending those pigs, I'm sure they were a little upset. That was a lot of money, right? They lost 2,000 pigs in the water. Pigs don't swim. Although I think in the Bahamas there are some pigs who do swim. For the most part, the pigs don't swim. Lost their entire livelihood, all the livestock gone. So they were a little upset. I can get why they would be upset. But when they go into town and they tell people what happened, and all of the people rush back to see, and then they see crazy naked guy dressed and in his right mind and cogent and thoughtful, they get afraid. And I've thought about this. Why would they be afraid now? It seems like they could rest. They could take the bolt off the door. They could unlock it. They can now be like, oh, now we can breathe. The terrorist is gone. This guy's different. Who is this guy? And I would think it would make them curious to want to explore how something like this could happen to someone like him. Curious at least. But as much power as this guy had previously to break the chains that bound him, there was a greater power at work in this guy's life that freed him from those chains. Jesus' power upset the social order. And the kind of power that upsets the social order makes those people who are in the us group a little bit afraid. Because if he can do that, if he has that kind of power, then I wonder what else he could do. And when one feels threatened by losing the little power that they have, the only response that seems obvious to them is to push the other power away. They wanted Jesus, they begged Jesus to go back to the other side. Go back to them. You're not one of us. We do not want you here. And so far as we know, Jesus would only go back to this area, the Decapolis, at least as far as we know. Maybe once or twice more. Let's finish the story. The crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and to leave him alone. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged. There's a lot of begging going on, isn't there? There's a lot of begging. Leave me alone. Get out of here. Let me go with you. But Jesus said, no, you can't go. I want you to go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been. So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of that region. He began to proclaim the great things that Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed at what he told them. This guy probably hadn't seen his family in a long time, you think? I mean, he was so grateful that all he wanted to do was just be with Jesus and learn what it meant to be a disciple of his. And he was ready to get in the boat and go back to the other side, and wherever it was that Jesus, his life had been changed. He had been dead, and now he was alive again. There was a resurrection that had taken place in this guy. So he was willing to go wherever and do whatever. And so he begged him and said, they don't want you here. I do. Can I go? And Jesus said, I don't think that's the best idea. His heart must have sunk. Right? Because he's trying to make sense now of all that's happened. He was a crazy naked guy who lived in the tombs with dead people. He was a crazy naked guy who just broke chains so powerfully. He terrorized the town. He was unwelcome, not wanted. But now something had changed in him, and he had been given new life. And the one who was responsible for giving him new life said to him, I don't think it's a good idea if you come with me. And his heart must have sunk, and I think to myself, now why would Jesus do such a thing? Couldn't he use another disciple? Here's why I think Jesus said no to him. My interpretation. When Jesus crossed the other side, when he went into an unclean place among an unclean people, and he had an encounter with a really unclean man, somebody who lived differently, thought differently, acted differently, he not only spoke into that with authority, he embodied authority. What he said and how he lived, they lined up. See, it's one thing to say something, and it's another thing to execute what you say in the same spirit in which you've said it. It is very difficult for me if I tell you that I love you, but I'm shaking my fist at you and screaming at the top of my lungs about what a terrible person you are because you think this, or you believe this, or you act this way. I can't reconcile the two things. Can you? And so, I think he tells the dude, listen, I'd love for you to come with me, but your people, they don't want me here anymore. But I still love them anyway. And I've got to leave a witness behind. Because if there's no witness behind, they're going to forget this in a matter of days or weeks. And they're going to go on about their business as if this never happened. You'd be amazed. And he's like, you mean they would actually forget that I was a crazy naked guy and now I'm sane Larry? Right? And my life is different? You think yeah, I think they probably would. Happens all the time. People's memory, it's short when it comes to things like this. And so he said, hey, I think your family would be happy to see you now. Because the last time they saw you, you were so bound up and you had so lost your identity that you had become unrecognizable to them. And now when they see you, they're going to remember who it was that's been missing all these years. And they're going to be astounded. And I bet you they're going to welcome you back. And you're going to be really happy to see them, and they're going to be really happy to see you. He said, but the people who just told me to get out of here, they need you to stay. They don't want me here, but this is your home. So I want you to stay behind. And I want you to remember what I did for you. And I want you to go and do the same. And you're going to run up against people who think differently and look differently and act differently. You're going to run up against people who want to create these divisions of us and them. He said that don't let them do it to you. Draw a circle around their hatred and welcome them in. They cannot be forced to come in, but welcome them in. Because the only real thing that's going to change and transform their hearts and lives is the power of love that you embody. You see, it's one thing to say something. It's another thing to live it. It's one thing to offer a political point of view. It's another thing to embody a political way of being. You guys, whatever the issues are that divide us from each other or from those who are outside of our faith, whatever they might be, however polarizing those issues may be, people will not understand that the love of Christ and the mercy, remember, He has been merciful to you, resides in you unless they are treated with the same love and mercy. Jesus was often called the friend of sinners. It was a nickname He got because prostitutes and tax collectors and thieves, they felt, believe it or not, comfortable in His presence. It's a weird thought, isn't it? You would think a holy man, right, would make people who are not so holy feel bad. But there was enough of that going on in their culture where there were religious people who were making them feel worse about themselves than they already did. In his presence, they felt welcome. Now, Jesus didn't condone their sin. He didn't agree with many of their ways of living. He knew what damage it was doing to their lives, but he refused to play the us-them game. He refused to get into dialogue with others and have vitriolic rhetoric that tore people down. Why? Because at the heart of every human being he looked at was a child of God, and he realized beneath the disguise or the mask that there was someone who was worthy of his love and his mercy and his gracious touch. As we get older, we get worse at this stuff. Because the stakes get higher. Now it's not just about being on a kickball or a dodgeball team. Now it's not what lunch table you sit at. Now we ratchet up these hard battle lines and shout across them with such hatred that you would think that we want the other dead. And it's not just our politicians, guys. We get lost in that spirit too. And we become unrecognizable when we do. What is your name? How is it that you identify yourself? And if it is that you identify yourself as a Christ follower, then you shouldn't just be saying one thing and doing another. They will know we are Christians by the way we vote. They will know we are Christians by the legislation we pass. They will know we are Christians by our love. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. We have all these strong convictions about things that need to happen in our larger culture. There's the kingdom of man and there's the kingdom of God, and we live in between those two. I just want to remind you that the hope of the world is not the kingdom of man. The hope of the world is the kingdom of God breaking through and bringing light where darkness exists. When people are pushed into places of death, despairing of life, not remembering who they are, it is up to us to remind them with embrace and love that you are a child of God. You may be far off of where you intended to be. There may be things going on in your life that I think are detrimental to you, that don't serve you well. But I can't change those about you, and you can't change those about me. But if I come alongside you and actually speak life into you and walk with you with the hopefulness that says, you know, you gave up on yourself a long time ago. I'm not giving up on you. I refuse. Because I know there's a power at work in our world and can be in your life that can take what was dead and breathe new life into it. And that's where there is hope. And so when you hear these discussions, particularly in these days, resist the spirit at work in our world that would cause you to align yourself, red, blue, Republican, Democrat, Clinton, Trump, us, them, and find a way to get rid of the divide, no matter what the issue may be, because until you have a standing in someone's life, until you have shown them that you're willing to walk with them through better and through worse, they won't even be able to hear the good news that you have to bring them. There are serious problems and issues in our larger culture today. We've talked about some of them. We have race issues, and we have immigration issues, and we have issues of violence, which we'll look at next week, and terror. There's so many issues that plague us. Again, we talked about things like abortion and homelessness and poverty that grinds at such a deep level. What if we put our money where our mouths are? And rather than shaking our fist against those who are doing what we don't want them to do, actually come alongside them and either help them in their decision making and be with them in that process. You know, it's one thing to be against abortion, for example, from a distance. Until you're in that spot and have to make that decision, you have no idea how difficult that may well be. But to walk alongside in support of, and hey, who knows, maybe a willingness, if they can't keep their child, for you to actually take that child in yourself, if you're so pro-life. See, that's putting the money where your mouth is.
Amen.
It's walking into the places, and rather just speaking with authority, it's living with authority. It's coming alongside people who need help and offering them that. It's loving into the place of the areas that most need change. Why? Because the most powerful force in the world is love. It's just larger than we try. In the kingdom of God, there's no us them. There are no culture wars. We are not battling with one another. We battle against principalities and wickedness from high places, evil spirits. We do not battle one another. We're fighting the wrong enemy. And we're wasting precious time. We must go beyond the culture wars of our day. We must embody a radical political alternative, one centered in love. Give it a chance. Give it a chance. Give it a chance. Let's pray. There is a power that is frightening, God, when we encounter, so much so that some resist it, because it upsets the social order. It turns things on their head. It recreates a different way of being. And for some of us in this world, that is too much. But I pray that you would give us the good sense to allow you to speak life into our death. That you would allow us this space, and we would allow you this space come and commune and help set right what was wrong, that you would give us a new name, a new identity, and that we could live out of that, and that it would be a place of hope and hopefulness for us, for our families, and for the larger world. Let us listen for that third voice, which is oftentimes very quiet, but extremely powerful. Let us listen for it, and let us follow it, that we may be indeed Christian. It's in the name of Christ we pray these things. Amen. So let's stand, please.